Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret societies, shadows in the pines. Operation GCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of melted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend in the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GC. Yeah, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo coats haunt the moon's pale beam. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Hell, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret societies, shadows in the pines. Operation GCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of melted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend in the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GC. Yeah, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo coats haunt the moon's pale beam. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Hell, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze.
Howdy, folks. Your host, Double J, back here coming at you live from my studio / RV dining room located directly inside America. Welcome back, folks, to the interwebs. Once again, nice to see you there, Jimmy Bobby. You like the name change. Barn burners indeed. Once again, howdy. Welcome back, folks, to the interwebs. Once again, your host, JJ Vance here, host of OpGCD, and perhaps more notably, not the vice president. Anyhow, welcome back, folks, to the interwebs. I will be your pilot and navigator tonight for this shenanigan-infused journey into the mind of this particular garbage can dude. And thank you for bearing with me. Apparently, my Starlink gremlins have a union rules not to work in the heat, so I want to let it cool down here first tonight because we got a real barn burner here on deck for y'all tonight. It is another edition of Smells Like Laurel Canyon. This is my tribute to Dave McGowan's work and his weird scenes inside the canyon. In fact, it was, I often joke that Dave McGowan, radicalized me as far as conspiracy culture goes, and one of the seminal books he wrote, besides Program to Kill and whatnot, is obviously his, he did some moon landing stuff, some Boston bombing stuff. I highly recommend on his website still today, Center for Informed America. But, weird scenes inside the canyon really struck home to me. And yes, thank you. And in fact, it was actually an interview I heard with Dave McGowan that inspired the series. So I was a big fan of the the Grunge counterculture. Not so much Nirvana, maybe a little bit Nirvana, a little bit Alice in Chains. I was more of a Pearl Jam fan myself, but it was a interview I heard with McGowan back before he published. I think this is long ago. I think this is before he even published the book, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, when it was a blog called Inside the LC, Laurel Canyon, the Dark Heart of the Hippie Dream, or he had some different titles to it. Anyhow, so the host had asked him, OCD for Operation GCD. All right, I like it. Yes, sir. So good evening. Thank you all for joining me here. Thank you all for joining me here tonight again to get a little GCD. But it was that comment from McGowan that really inspired this series for me. And I started writing it on my blog, operationgcd.com. Had some blogs on there. Started writing it. Strangely enough, I published the first, I had written it that night, the night that Chris Cornell died. In fact, I published my first chapter in that series, and I woke up the next morning to find out Chris Cornell had died. So that would have been May of 2016, I feel like. So, and McGowan said in response, he said, look, the host had asked him and said, it seems like all these characteristics you've identified, McGowan that is, in his Weird Scenes book, may apply to future music scenes, right? Be it the new age, so on and so forth, the evolutions of rock music, if you will, onto the 90s countercultural movement of grunge. And not only, McGowan was oh, my back. Apologize there, folks. I told you them gremlins are acting up. So he said it wasn't really his thing. He said his music scene was the hippie music scene from Laurel Canyon. So I was like, fair enough. Grunge scene was my scene. I was deeply, Nirvana's big hit, Smells Like Teen Spirit, which obviously I'm parroting with the Smells Like Laurel Canyon scene. With the Muppets here, we got Chris Novacek here on the bass. We got Kurt Cobain here, and we got Animal Grohl here on the drums. And it is an interesting bunch that these folks are because, they have a lot of the same characteristics, if not all the same characteristics, as identified by the many acts there in the Laurel Canyon scene, be it the interesting heritage and ancestry, right? The spook stuff. That was a big salient characteristic there as well. The military-industrial complex, natures of those things. So, we're going to get into some of that surrounding these matters, but I really kind of missed the boat, I guess, maybe. I was a little too young. was 11, I think, when Nirvana's Smells Like Teen Spirit hit. So obviously, maybe that was in part why I wasn't such a big Nirvana fan, but it was Pearl Jam. I was a big member of the Pearl Jam fan club, getting all the Pearl Jam albums on vinyl. And that is correct. I am not the vice president. And getting all the Pearl Jam albums on vinyl, that was part of the deal, and I was a big fan of that. However, I never seen Pearl Jam in concert until they played their first concert back in Seattle, and I think it was about 4.5 years. Now, this was the bootleg albums, like the Grateful Dead used to do bootleg albums of all their concerts, and there's a lot of Grateful Dead connections to the grunge rock scene, not the least of which through Courtney Love, Kurt Cobain's wife, whose father, Hank Harrison, was indeed the manager of the Grateful Dead, right? So I actually drove from Great Falls, Montana. I saw the concert the night before this one on the 5th. This was the second night, I believe, and they did a 2-night stint, and it's a hell of a performance. I was my first duty assignment in the Air Force. I was guarding nuclear missiles. So I had a quick turnaround. We basically, myself and my fellow garbage can dudes, drove about 12 hours to go see that concert in Seattle, and then drove about 12 hours straight back from the concert, just in time to make it for our nuclear security duties. But that was how big of a grunge rock fan I was. That's for damn sure, especially Pearl Jam. And, there's a lot of crossovers with a lot of these music scenes, even the ones before that. The folks that had impacts on the grunge rock scene, for example, Red Hot Chili Peppers and had a lot of impact there on Pearl Jam. In fact, they trade members from times, drummers. And in fact, we see more of those kind of similarities in the throughputs from the Laurel Canyon scene onto the grunge scene through the families, literally some of the same families. In fact, the Young Turks were the Hollywood actors that sold the Laurel Canyon scene, like folks like Peter Fonda and Easy Rider, the film Easy Rider. And, where folks like Dennis Hopper was dressed like David Crosby, David Van Cortlandt Crosby. Again, it's the ancestry of a lot of these families in the Laurel Canyon scene as well that apply to the grunge rock scene. In fact, speaking of blue bloodish kind of families, in occult secret societies, one could argue, do not keep my gremlins in the barn. Well, that's for damn certain. They get hot enough apparently. But anyhow, the matters of these blue bloods, one could actually argue that the Skull and Bones and the Taft family, specifically of the Skull and Bones, the descendants of Alfonso Taft, the founder of Skull and Bones, largely produced the grunge scene. And it's not even just direct members from the Taft family in the scene or the promotion thereof or filming music videos thereof as well. It's also the fact that you have the influence that they yielded, right? The influence so they may not be a major name in the scene, but the influence they yielded. In fact, some of that influence is seen in the grunge scene through Dave Grohl. Dave Grohl's father, the man who was a speechwriter from Nixon and Reagan and Ohio Governor and U.S. Senator Bob Taft, actually got his start in media back in the 60s, courtesy of the Taft family. So, and we're going to go over some of that stuff here tonight, folks of the interwebs. We're going to go over more of the connecting principles in that fashion and how they're very much the same scene. So we're going to cover, I know I've haven't discussed these matters in a while here on Operation GCD, but you folks may have heard in the theme song that grunge rock is not as it seems. So it's very much the same apparatus that would that would be established in the original rock scene, right back in the Laurel Canyon scene that Dave McGowan highlighted. So not only do we see some of the same families, see some of the same production, the same marketing here, see some of the same blue blood ancestry, the military intelligence complex. We have spooks. We have combat spooks in both scenes. Stephen Stills, as highlighted in from the Byrds and Crosby, Stills and Nash and Young, we see them in Dave McGowan's book. He cited as Stephen Stills doing some combat missions, commando style, for his State Department CIA father in the early onset in the years leading up to the ground war in Vietnam. Viet fucking Nam, that is. Viet fucking Nam, that is. My apologies. So we see that also in the grunge scene too. We have a little bit of that action. We have commandos. We have spook stuff, right, directly related to it. So we're going to be going over all of these different threads that I'm going to be unpacking further in the future on this series. I'm going to reestablish these points, the salient characteristics in comparison, right, from the two scenes. And again, some of the same families directly related. So we saw Peter Fonda, an Easy Rider, selling the marketing campaign through Hollywood for the Laurel Canyon scene. And we see the same thing here with his daughter, Bridget Fonda, who stars in the film Singles, along with opposite Matt Dillon, who plays a grunge rock lead singer there in Seattle. In fact, the band that plays Matt Dillon's band in the film is Pearl Jam. So we see all of that interesting aspect as well. A lot of spook stuff, though, like McGowan cites, a lot of spook stuff, a lot of murder. You know, both scenes have their own serial killers, from the Manson family on through the early 70s. You have the dating game killer murking folks around there. You got the, what do they call them? The Stranglers. I always get their, Kenneth Bianca and his cousin, the Hillside Stranglers. So you got a lot of that action. You got the Green River Killer in Seattle, and you got, in fact, you have numerous parties that are involved in both scenes that are being victimized by these serial killers, be it the Manson family or the Green River Killer. The lead singer of the Gits, an all-female grunge rock band, Mia Zapata, was murdered in 1994 at the age of 27. It's a standard trend, right? And we see a lot of those strange murders. Zapata, obviously, you may be familiar with that name, and her ancestor, General Zapata of the Mexican Revolution. And you also, another corollary there as well, her father was a media executive in Louisville, Kentucky, and a contemporary to the Taft broadcasting family that's so integrated and associated with the same grunge scene. So a lot of similarities with these folks, but a lot of murders. So, and again, a lot of connectivity. So we see throughputs in some of those murders, like the Laurel Canyon murder there in 75 of Tim Buckley, one of the musical acts there. Maybe familiar with that name. His son, Jeff Buckley, met his early demise as well, I believe also at the age of 27. So, and Jeff Buckley was very much the protege of Chris Cornell and Soundgarden. So, you know, we see those throughputs. Another thing highlighted in the McGowan series was the occult nature of a lot of these bands, right? As I mentioned, Courtney Love's got direct connects to the Grateful Dead, who initially started off as two bands, and they mashed in together to one band. That was the Zodiacs and the Warlocks. They then became the Grateful Dead. No, I was a big fan of Jeff Buckley for sure. In fact, one of Jeff Buckley's closest friends there in the New York music scene was one of my favorite musicians as well, Mike Doty. He's kind of a folk. He does a lot of different genres. He went through a folk rock era that I like, though. He was formerly the lead singer of Soul Coughing. Now, he's not grunge. He came out of New York City. He came out in the mid-'90s, though, and part of the MTV scene for sure was Soul Coughing. And would you believe that Mike Doty would very much fall in these same kind of categories as well? His father, a career military officer at West Point, where Doty would spend much of his childhood there. So there are a lot of similarities across all these music scenes. I saw a mention of Nine Inch Nails and Trent Reznor and Marilyn Manson. Well, you have more fathers of the military-industrial complex. For example, I think his name's Brian Warner, a.k.a. Marilyn Manson, the protege of Trent Reznor in their whole process church electric industrial rock movement. You see his father, Marilyn Manson there, his father, career military army officer. Not that dissimilar from Michael Stipe. Michael Stipe is closely associated with the grunge rock movement. So are other folks with weird and strange connections. So Michael Stipe's father, a career military officer, helicopter pilot, Viet fucking Nam in Korea and whatnot. They would cross paths with the Grolls back in the early 60s in Fort Benning. That's odd. It's before Dave's time. He was not born until 69. However, they knew each other. That was a book Dave Grohl's mom wrote a few years ago. So see all these throughputs and connections. It makes you wonder if it is the same apparatus. What started off as McGowan arguing that the hippie rock movement kind of co-opted the opposition to the Viet fucking Nam war movement, replacing the clean-cut folks on college campuses and their professors with these dirty hippies dressed in tattered clothing. And again, we see those same similarities with the grunge movement as far as the characteristics and nature of their appearance. The grunge, tattered clothing, and long hair. And you see an evolution of that with just the hippies. And then you see the evolution of that with the grunge, and they're back to, there was a revival of that kind of atmosphere and dress even around the 90s grunge movement, right? The whole, disheveled appearance, which really all goes back to the Freaks that are in Laurel Canyon, Vito, Polikas, and the Freaks. So they're the ones who really started going out on the dance floor and, gyrating and moving all sorts of weird like. And we see that kind of evolution as well with the grunge rock movement and their mosh pits. One could argue that came out of the punk movement there as well, but it was very much embraced within the grunge rock movement. So we see a lot of the same characteristics, but one thing I would argue as well is we see an evolution of that opposition to the war movement, right? So as much as McGowan argues, I think rightfully so, that the hippies were a controlled opposition, right? Like I was just saying, we see the evolution to that controlled opposition in the 90s, just outright telling you to go rock, quote unquote, rock the vote via MTV, which again is started by direct connections to the CIA and grunge rock, and that has a throughput directly to grunge rock. So, we see these repeating patterns again, and the evolution of this controlled opposition to the war and whatnot would be what we see here in the Black Sheep film, the cinematic masterpiece from 1996, starring Chris Farley and David Spade. And this scene right here, called Voting Kicks Ass, and the MTV Rock the Vote. Again, MTV started in large part by the Copeland family. Again, these matters are directly related to CIA, and REM is most exclusively REM sleep in a hypnotic fashion, I suppose is what they're saying. Not only is Michael Stipe deeply connected to his father, to the army there, his band manager and friend and lawyer for 30 years for the band, Burtis Downs number 4, is the son of a secret CIA agent who died on Air America back in 1964 in Taiwan. So we see that those folks are the ones that bring us all the rock music on MTV, the Copelands there, and we see that going through REM as one of the main acts there, and we see that's connected to the CIA as well. And then we see the evolution of these matters from the controlled opposition in the 60s through the evolution of that into the MTV era. And then in the 90s, they're telling us to go rock the vote, right? We got one of the original grunge tracks, Mudhoney.
Woo! Yeah, man! I love you guys! Whoa, whoa. Hang on. All right. Excellent, man!
So we see the grunge movement, who was this, countercultural effort, right, launched to the world in 1991 via Smells Like Teen Spirit. Again, there was some proto activity in bands, but in this whole movement, but most of those bands all roll up into other future bands, right? And we see the same occult nature as we see with the previous era, with the Laurel Canyon scene. Pardon me. We see, as I was saying, the Zodiacs and the Warlocks become the Grateful Dead, from a line from the Egyptian Book of the Dead, a band full of Masons and members of the Bohemian Grove, that is, the Grateful Dead. Started by the Tavistock, literally. The son of the founder of the Tavistock, Eric Trist, his son Alan, was the band's music publishing company president and friend of Garcia. In fact, Jerry gets a ticket outside the Esalen Institute with him in his car back in the day. So a lot of deep connections there with the Tavistock and the CIA and the Grateful Dead. And again, occultism runs throughout there, and Courtney Love's deeply ingrained in that movement as well, obviously. But we see the occult nature of a lot of these bands. The Mamas and the Papas, very processed church band with John Phillips being cited as one of those financiers, and Mama Cass also being cited as a member. Same probably could be said for Michelle Phillips, since she married Dennis Hopper, Charles Manson's friend and presumed processing, who's the son of an OSS officer who was a secret agent dude living in Virginia. Hopper would reveal this before his death. So we see a lot of those activities there, but we also see the occult bands, these predecessor bands to the 91 incident that launched of Smells Like Teen Spirit, the launch is grunge on the world stage. We see bands like Mother Love Bone. That's a very sexual connotation. I believe they're referring to a boner. That band would then form Temple of the Dog, a serious reference, right? Serious star worship. We see a lot of other matters such as that. Courtney Love's predecessor band, the Pagan Kids, or the Pagan Children. Those are predecessor band to Hole. And we see a lot of these folks around this same scene, Hole, Nirvana, Mother Love Bone. All these folks, not just Mia Zapata, who's allegedly murdered by the Green River Killer and laid out in a very occult fashion on the sidewalk of Seattle, that stumped folks for many years, but they would later pin it on a guy that I don't think had anything to do with it. And we'll get into more of those details here tonight, but the deaths surrounding these folks and the spooky nature of the folks that the deaths surround is very interesting. So, and Courtney Love is at the center of that activity, all of it. In fact, her father would allege she was traveling around handing out LSD or distributing it at Grateful Dead concerts at the age of, I believe, 7. Because he and her mother, they had parted ways. And her mother, Lois Carroll, in fact, her father's alleged to be Marlon Brando. So there we are back to that Tate Polanski scene with the Manson family. Marlon Brando, as cited in Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, it's part of that scene. So, and very much is. There's a lot to be said there, and it's alleged, and a strong argument can be made. Many rumors have persisted that Courtney Love's mother was, in fact, the daughter of Marlon Brando. So, and she was actually a trust fund kid through her mother. So, Courtney Love's maternal grandmother, that is. A lot of trust fund money there. So, Kane, good to see you there, sir. Look forward to the next Kane Bees the Purge weekly Idaho wrap-up, where I'm grateful to be a co-host on a fast food type 2 diabetes weekly roundup where we occasionally talk Idaho 4 case. But I believe we'll be doing another purge tomorrow. Folks can come check us out over there. Myself and Kane B and our Abbott and Costello true crime comedy routine. True crime. I don't even really know what that is. I'm not sure what fake crime is. We have true crime. What's fake crime? But anyhow, we will be talking about a lot of murder tonight again. And it's not only the connections of these murders and these folks between these two scenes, Los Angeles in the 1960s, Seattle in the 1990s. Well, you can argue in the mid 80s, but we also see just so much murder. Again, I'm not going to say that this is I always joke it's not a true crime channel. I don't do true crime. Again, I don't know what it is, but I did recently change my podcast to RSS feed on Spotify or Apple or whatever, calling it true crime. But that's my joke on the matter, because these matters, when we call them true crime, again, I don't know. These murders go on and on and on. Not only, again, the serial killers connected to the scene, the death of young artists and their families. As I said, there's a lot of strange, as McGowan cites, a lot of the parents of a lot of these folks met strange demises, cited in the Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. Well, remember that Taft family, the descendants of William Howard Taft, the only U.S. president and the chief Supreme Court justice we've ever had, only person to hold both positions in American history, grandson of the founder of the Skull and Bones. Well, his grandson, William Howard Taft, that is, the folks, the progenitor of folks in here associated with tonight's grunge tale and their Taft influence on the grunge scene, fellow by the name of Holbert Taft Jr. He would blow up. Yep, true story. He just blowed up one day in his bomb shelter in Indian Hill in Cincinnati, Ohio, on a mound, nonetheless. But that's a strange tale. That's a real strange tale. And again, it's his son, Dudley Taft, that would have an intersection with Dave Grohl's father as far as employment goes, because the Tafts and that Taft Broadcasting also had a paper in Cincinnati that they teamed up with the E.W. Scripps Company out of Cincinnati. And that's who gave Dave Grohl's father a start in journalism after he got out of the Army. The Army where he's friends with Michael Stipe's father. to pay no attention to the fact that these two men would then later spawn some of the biggest rock stars we know, but I'm sure that's just a coincidence. So we'll be getting into these threads here again tonight, folks, recapping some of these matters I've discussed in the past, adding some additional details onto those things, and also discussing a lot new matters, such as all of these murders and the serial killers surrounding such in both scenes, which again, the Green River Killer is often cited as being one man. There's a lot of arguments it's not the case. Nonetheless, there's a lot of dead bodies around both scenes, and one Seattle psychologist would argue that Mia Zapata, that lead singer from the all-female grunge band, who this murder changed the game in Seattle. When she was found murdered after a show on the sidewalk laid out in a ritual fashion, as we'll review some of those newspaper accounts and whatnot, this matter really changed a lot of things up there in Seattle in the grunge scene. Much like other murders did, like the Manson family and the Laurel Canyon scene. These were integral and seminal events, or they were seminal events in changing the course of activities in both of these scenes and really painting a different narrative, really more of a true narrative. These ideas of the summer of love with the hippies, or they really didn't have a summer of love with the grunge, but it's tough to have a summer of love when you're all doped up, you know. Obviously, LSD and whatnot, and some marijuana to a certain extent in the 60s, evolved to the mescaline and cocaine situation in Laurel Canyon in the 70s. But by the 80s and 90s, it was all heroin. We see a lot of deaths around that in the grunge scene, including that lead singer, Mother Love Bone, which would then, after his death, Andrew Wood, would spawn Soundgarden and Pearl Jam. So we'll definitely be getting into those matters, and again, all of these murders, and laying the groundwork for future discussions on some of these threads here in the future on this series, folks. So once again, folks at the interwebs, I do appreciate you all joining me here tonight. Thanks again for joining me to get a little GCD. Please check out the rest of the show. Let's see, I thought an acquaintance was going to hit me when I told him the truth about the Grateful Dead. Oh, well, you know, that's a good point, Sabrina. A lot of folks are very, very much, you know, Grateful Dead especially. I was a big Deadhead myself growing up as a teenager, big time. Started my love affair with San Francisco through that. And, you know, I do remember some cognitive dissonance, in fact, if you will, regarding my discoveries of the CIA nature and the Tavistock nature of the Grateful Dead, amongst other things. So, and again, they're not without their own strange murders. You know, they've had, again, all of these bands and all these movements have so many murders that, like, it's not just the serial killers, not just the young, you know, the young artists and actors. It's their families. You know, how often does a Taft blow up? Literally blow up. No known reason or cause for the explosion back in '67. But the grandson of William Howard Taft, you know, great grandson of Alfonso Taft. I believe that's how it went. Maybe second great grandson. Anyhow, the founder of the Skull and Bones there, this Hulbert Taft fella, father of Dudley Taft, who'd be connected to the Grohl family, amongst other things, and have their own member, Dudley Taft Jr., as a lead singer in the grunge rock scene. So, you know, how often do Taft members blow up in their bomb shelters on a mount? I would say not very often. But we do have that as part of the tale, and weird situations such as that, like folks recall in the Weird Scenes book, Graham Parsons. He would meet an early demise, and then one of Charles Manson's friends would then take his body from apparently the city morgue or whatnot. Somehow there was a stolen body. They would burn it in Joshua Tree. Sounds kind of ritualistic if you ask me. But the whole Parsons family has a strange death. They were a big orange grove owning family in Florida, in Georgia. And yeah, they a lot of weird deaths. Again, how often do you know, in his family as well? So you have these, you know, wealthy families and, you know, et cetera, meeting these weird demises in both scenes. So it does beg the question, what really is going on here when you see the manufactured nature of what these music scenes really are? You know, and again, they are it devolved, if you will. I'd say it evolved, but it really devolved by the grunge scene, where they're doing MTV, Hollywood Films, Rock the Vote with the grunge acts. You know, at least they had Jim Morrison on national TV saying, you know, he was anti-war, despite, you know, his father starting the war, but that's a horse of a different color. But, you know, we do see, again, all these repeating patterns from the occult nature of the bands, the blue blood nature of the families involved in these matters, We see the same machinations, if you will, of the marketing campaigns through the Fondas and gang with selling these ideas through Hollywood films. And we see some of the same throughputs of murder, like the Buckleys, for example, directly connecting those things. And again, we see folks having significant impact, REM, CIA, OSS stuff. And again, they're not the only spooks involved in this scene. So these are the threads we'll be going more over here this evening. And we will also, yes, sir, barn burners indeed, Jimmy Bobby. I like the name formerly Jim Bobby, now Jimmy Bobby. Yes, sir. Barn burners indeed. So we'll be going through all these matters here tonight, folks, laying down more of the foundation on these threads to pick up on more in the future. But I do thank you all again for joining me here tonight to get a little GCD. Please find the rest of tonight's program over there on patreon.com/Operation GCD. You'll also find the links in the show notes. You can't search it over there. Been back and forth with the folks over at Patreon. They don't seem to really care that folks have trouble signing up across numerous platforms. And when you go in the search bar at Patreon, you can't find Operation GCD anywhere. But I will continue to work on these matters with Patreon and recommend folks use the direct link. And I also recommend folks don't sign up through Apple apps. I believe that charges you an extra 30%, maybe even $4 a month on top of the $10 a month combo for Operation GCD Sundays and Thursdays. And again, we'll be doing some more of these occult genealogy on a future series here, because a lot of these things do cross over, from the David Van Cortlandt Crosbys of the Laurel Canyon scene, as in the Van Cortlandt founding family of New York. We do find many, many crossovers with the grunge scene. For example, Eddie Vedder's ancestor Vedder, Kurt Cobain's ancestor Cobain, and Chris Cornell's ancestor Cornell would all find themselves wrapped around in the same scene in the roughly 300 plus years ago with those Van Cortlandts up there in New Amsterdam. So early founding families there as well. A lot of crossovers. Very odd activity nonetheless, but it does seem to paint a picture, not only in comparison to what we're unfolding here in comparison to the salient characteristics Dave McGowan identifies in Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. These matters of the familial nature of these things, it seems to paint a picture, well, it's a whole different environment. There's a secret kind of history, again, amongst these families and these secret societies. Again, you can argue the grunge scene is largely brought to us by Skull and Bones. That would not be a inaccurate statement. In fact, that Dudley Taft Jr., the lead singer of Sweetwater, the band Sweetwater, they were kind of a mid-level grunge band, but they were on the scene very early. They did national tours opening up for Candlebox. I was a big fan of them, and Alice in Chains. So, and we see Alice in Chains there. We see throughputs back to Laurel Canyon through Jimi Hendrix and not Lane Staley, Jerry Cantrell's father, Rooster, the song Rooster, about his Vietnam service, Viet fucking Nam, that is. That song's about Cantrell's father, who went to join the Army and the 101st Airborne, I believe it is, out of Fort Campbell, with Jimi Hendrix. They were on the same basic training unit out of Seattle and assigned to the same unit. Apparently Hendrix went to Hollywood and Rooster went to Vietnam, Viet fucking Nam. But with Dudley Taft Jr. there, we see, due to those tours, national tours, he went to a private school in Seattle. And in that private school, his friends started another kind of a post-grunge band. You may know them as the Presidents of the United States of America. It's a funny name, being friends with Dudley Taft, who's a descendant of such a powerful family that has a family, the only man to be the President of the United States of America and the Chief Supreme Court Justice, William Howard Taft. So a lot of Taft stuff going on here. Again, not only their direct impact, we literally have a Taft that directed a lot of the music videos in the grunge scene. So not only the bands, the music videos, the direct impact through stuff like the Grohl family and Dave Grohl's dad, deep connects. So a lot of those matters, a lot of deep connects through those things. And I do, as much as I love the city of Seattle, again, and I loved the Grateful Dead. I was a big fan, again, back to that comment. These matters, I call them how's the season, folks. So, I do recall it being a very, very much a difficult pill to swallow, so to speak, with the Grateful Dead. So maybe it's a bit easier with the grunge scene. But yeah, like I remember when so for example, I spent a whole week in Seattle on vacation from my mid tour in South Korea, circa, we'll call it 22 years ago this month, actually. And I remember going to the Jimi Hendrix Museum. Like I was a big fan of Hendrix too. So, and again, Hendrix, big in that Laurel Canyon scene. He's friends with two of his closest friends, Peter Tork from the Monkees and Jack Nicholson, the actor. Same crew as Easy Rider, Jack Nicholson, Dennis Hopper, and Peter Fonda. So these things are strange, folks, when we see all these connections in these, tight circles. Yep. So Steve Allen. Yeah. So that's an interesting comment there, Ivana. Steve Allen, Bill Gates. That'll be a future commentary on some of the financial aspects in the grunge scene and Steve Allen's associations. For example, Pearl Jam, after they were Mother Love Bone, went through a couple iterations there before they became Pearl Jam, which we'll get into some of those namesakes and the psychedelic, comparisons from the psychedelic scene and the direct throughput from the 60s LSD psychedelic scene of Laurel Canyon, Timothy Leary, to the grunge scene and Pearl Jam, right? But we see also they called their band Mookie Blaylocks after the Seattle Supersonics point guard, Mookie Blaylock. So Steve Allen does play in some role in these financial matters. He was the owner of that Seattle Supersonics team that Pearl Jam, for whatever reason, changed their name to for a brief period. So anyhow, these are the matters that we will be discussing and unpacking here in future editions of this Smells Like Laurel Canyon series. So again, rehashing a lot of the stuff gone over in the past, adding some new details, and laying the foundation, the anchor points for some of these future threads, right? Because again, it goes deep, folks. It goes real deep when you start looking at all these matters. And again, you start unpacking some of these families like those Van Cortlands. Who's that? David Crosby's not only just a Van Cortland, he's a Van Schuler, which causes him to be cousins with folks like Alexander Hamilton's family, who married into the Schulers and whatnot. So you get some real tight connections with a lot of power in Society of Cincinnati roots. Those Taft family lines, society members all the way back to Salem witch trials. That's a common appearance we've been unpacking here on Operation GCD. So on that note, folks of the interwebs, once again, I thank you all for joining me here tonight to get a little GCD. And please catch the rest of this broadcast. If you catch this broadcast in the future or tonight, please pop on over to patreon.com/Operation GCD. And we'll see you over there. And on that note, folks of the interwebs can check out Operation GCD Live this Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Times for an occult and or esoteric review of the film They Live. And this Friday's, got Ryder Lee coming on and guest co-host Landon from the Daily Dissident. And we're going to be talking weird West Virginia. A couple dudes from West Virginia, myself there, Ryder Lee from Mothmanville, West Virginia, and Landon down from the southern regions, not near Logan, the other side of the state. But nonetheless, we're talking all matters weird West Virginia this Fridays on Operation GCD, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And also, I almost forgot, and please don't forget, Thursdays, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, The Anatomy of the Satanic Panic with everyone's favorite psychological operations Green Beret satanic officer, Muppet Mikey Aquino and gang. We're unpacking the psychological operations around those matters and laying the groundwork to prove that this is all machinations, not to believe our own senses. When you look at all the volume of satanic ritual murders, ritual abuse, especially of children, going on contemporary to these alleged satanic panic times versus the actual machinations of Aquino's psyops to mind more in the various evolutions and phases that went through. These are the matters we're continuing to discuss there on Thursdays. This week, we're going through phase 2 of the flap of 1980, the satanic panic of 1980, where last week we went over the 1975 flap. That's where all the propagandists don't want you to remember that one. All these ongoing satanic panic propagandists we see on YouTube's documentary podcasts, Netflix specials, etc. They all point back to the 1980 flap. They don't want you to understand there was ones previous to that. And we started that laying that foundation last week with more than that in the future. But this week we're going to phase 2, the 1980s. Michelle Remembers flap in activities, unpacking the activities and propaganda and comparing the activities and the propaganda of that phase that lasts until 1992, when we get the landing report in phase 3 of the Satanic Panic. I don't know what phase we're on now. It's more like 5 or 6. We haven't gotten there yet, but these evolutions, much like many of these things, they're connecting, right? There's a lot of throughputs and connectivities. I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole here on the occult genealogy of America business or any of these matters, but as I did a 6 Degrees of Anton LaVey 2 weeks ago, or disregard, of Michael Aquino 2 weeks ago on Thursdays, where we learned a lot about LaVey and his connections and environment that he grew up in, operated in, and thrived in through his life, not the least of which the early membership of the Church of Satan, which the financier of which was that international gun trafficking family. And that fella was married to a cousin of the Van Cortlands, an Astor. And that cousin, that man's wife, the international gun trafficking dude, and his name is Bouvier. They were the family behind the Vickers Gun Corporation, and LaVey's occultist hero, Basil Zerhoff. So we saw those matters. Well, it just turns out that Bouvier fellow is married to an Astor, and that lady Astor there is a Van Cortlandt Astor as well, much like David Crosby and others. And not only that, her first cousin, that Astor lady, married to Bouvier, the financier behind the Church of Satan and early membership there, she's the first cousin of a founding member of the Process Church of the Final Judgment. So that's what I mean by understanding the environment, folks. I just realized that after doing those 6 degrees and understanding some of the new framework I'm working on, and I realized, oh, shoot, not only is that Bouvier fellow who's financing LaVey and financing the LaVey's hero, that occultist, and the gun trafficking dude, that Basil Zerhoff and the Vickers Gun Corporation. This dude was the heir, Bouvier, I'm sorry. His wife, again, first cousins with a founding member of the Process Church, the Final Judgment. So, and more Society of the Cincinnati membership there, because that first cousin, her father was a member of the Society of Cincinnati. Satan Astor Drayton. Actually, his birth name was John Astor Drayton, but everyone called him Satan. So that's strange. So anyhow, more on that in the future with the occult genealogy of America and these matters of the 6 degrees of folks like Muppet Mikey Aquino. Because had I not, that's why I like to play that game, folks, is to understand the environment. And that's what I mean by the environment. Because if all these folks know each other and there's a lot of connectivity, not only through their operations and activities, but their family trees, well, then it starts to paint a different picture. Different picture of American history and the things we've been subjected to as far as, the product of these folks, right? What really is the benefit of these scenes? Be it the Laurel Canyon hippie scene, what benefit has that done to America? It seems a lot like a commie invasion of drugs, sex, and rock and roll, satanic style. A lot of Satan and murder stuff there. Same can be said around the grunge scene. A lot of ongoing strange deaths. I mean, again, as I started off tonight's introduction, as we'll be closing out here, joining us over on Patreon for the rest of the show, I published the first chapter in this the night Chris Cornell died a very suspicious death. One I would assert was, considering all things considered here, very likely murder. So, and on that note, folks of the interwebs, I will catch you next time. And thanks again for joining me here tonight, GCD. And I'll see you Patreon folks here momentarily over on the Patreon side.
Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret societies, shadows in the pines. Operation GCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of melted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend in the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo lighting things ablaze. OpGCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GC. Yeah, the world's a puzzle. Grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo coats haunt the moon's pale beam. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Hell, the world's a puzzle. Grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. OpGCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret societies, shadows in the pines. OpGCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of melted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend and the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle. Grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. OpGCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GC. Yeah, the world's a puzzle. Grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo coats haunt the moon's pale beam. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Hell, the world's a puzzle. Grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze.